Welcome back, everybody. Wednesday, January 25th. I am John Aravosis here with the Aravosis Report, here to talk to you about the latest news from Ukraine. Today is Tank Day. Very exciting. Introduce yourselves. As you guys know, we usually take a minute or two or three just to let folks slowly come here. Let me get TikTok rolling on my iPad as well. It is also Volodymyr, Zelensky's birthday today, 45 years old. Kind of scary if you're older than that. Now I'm getting the TikTokers rolling. Ooh, and I had a funny thing I was going to show you all that I probably don't have in my notes here. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Hey, TikTokers. Just waiting here to get rolling, or we are slowly getting rolling here. Ooh la la. Oh, boy. Good news day. Happy to say. Yep. Oh, hey guys. As always, in case anybody's like new and watching this or watching it later, we take a couple minutes just to have everybody join us from TikTok and Twitter and everywhere else. So that is why we are sitting here for about another minute or two. Not too much longer, though. Hello, Gothenburg, which I have been to. I think I've told you that before. Hey, pause. Thanks for the pause there, Zoe. Oh, my. It's a good news day. Anglo-Saxon. I always love that. Anglo-Saxon. We are Anglo-Saxons. We are Anglo-Saxons. Although the French use the phrase too, but it makes me laugh when the French would use it, but especially when the Russians use it. The Anglo-Saxons. It sounds like we're. Thank you, PJ. It sounds like we're coming in our, Viking boats or something, or I don't know what the hell it is. Anyway. Ooh la la. All right, guys, I will get rolling. I think we've got a good critical mass of folks here. Welcome. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. This is our nightly show. Thank you, Crusher, for the skates. Our nightly show coming to you live from Washington, D.C., where I talk about the latest news from Ukraine for that day. And then the second half of the show, I take your guys' questions, comments. We discuss the news on TikTok, as always. Thank you, Louie, for the gifts there. On TikTok, and L2. The TikTokers are in a rage again today with gifts. I love you guys. Thank you. On TikTok, submit your questions via the Q&A link that's in my TikTok profile. On YouTube, obviously use the question box at the bottom. Super chat questions I will always get to immediately or almost immediately because I appreciate the gifts. TikTok, I will always try to do a shout out when I see you guys do a TikTok gift because your guys' gifts do matter. I do this for free. I've been doing it since the war broke out, pretty much full time. Actually, full time. I shouldn't say pretty much full time. And your guys' gifts help pay the bills. So thank you for them. Let's get rolling. So I have to show you, thank you, Life's Journey, a photo of that somebody was sharing on Twitter that I thought was absolutely freaking brilliant. Okay, check it out. I'm going to show you first. It says Dankeschön. Get it? You got to have a little bit of a knowledge of German, but you don't really have to. Instead of Dankeschön, which is thank you, Dankeschön, which is sort of thank you. Which I love it because it's almost an English joke in German, but I thought it was really cute. The thing I'm curious about is in German, does that joke even register in German? Or do you have to pretty much be an English speaker to appreciate the joke kind of thing? You know what I mean? Anyways, I just think it was a great comment. So thank you, Germany. We are very happy for Germany today, or very happy because of Germany. So we thank the Germans. So big news today. So today's big news, the Americans and the Germans have stepped forward and said we will both be providing our state-of-the-art main battle tanks. The Americans will be providing the M1 Abrams tank. Pretty much everyone agrees the American tank is the best tank in the world. The German tank is the Leopard 2. They are going to be sending some of their Leopard 2s, but just as importantly, maybe even more importantly, the Germans are going to be, okay, the Germans do get the joke. Okay, good. More importantly, the Germans have also approved for other countries to send their German tanks to Ukraine. The way it works, I always like to repeat this because it's an important point. Countries that sell arms, whether it's the United States, Switzerland, Germany, whoever, whenever we sell weapons to a country, we always make that country sign a contract that says that they will not be forwarding the weapons to any other. In other words, they will not re-gift our weapons without our permission. And it kind of makes sense. The US wants to make sure that when we give our weapons to countries, they don't go to countries we don't want them to go to, right? And the French and the Germans and everybody else does the same thing. So that's why we've had this issue of the last few weeks of trying to get the Germans to buy into this, because many countries around Europe, 13, 14, depending who you talk to, have bought the German tanks already, the Leopard 2. There's about 2,000 of them around Europe, and we want those countries to be able to give those tanks to Ukraine. Well, any case, so the Germans, well, let's start first with Biden. So Biden came out first this morning and gave a little, not a press conference, but a speech saying that America will be providing 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. The Germans are going to be providing an initial allotment of 14 Leopard 2 tanks, followed by, I believe from what I was reading, at least another allotment of 14. Thank you, Ellen. Depending who you talk to, honestly, the numbers are still kind of up in the air. I mean, those initial numbers we know, okay? Initially, Germany sending 14, initially, America sending 31. Mind you, that's on top of the British tanks, the Challenger 2s that are already being sent as well. That's 14. The French light tanks, I always get this wrong. It's like AX something dash 10R, AMX dash 10RC. Am I right? That are light tanks. So depending who you talk to, they're tanks or they're not tanks, right? It depends. And I may be forgetting some other tanks that are coming as well. In addition, certainly the Ukrainians have been given a lot of tanks by European countries already, but they've been Soviet era tanks. So the Poles, for example, gave the Ukrainians around 200 tanks already, but they were Soviet era tanks. Thank you, Carla. Which are the tanks that the Ukrainians use. So they're still very useful, but they're not nearly as good as our tanks or the Germans' tanks. Thank you, Carlos. Yes, happy birthday, Mr. Z. It's Zelensky's birthday today, 45 years old. Anybody who's my age, if you want to feel old, the president of a country fighting a war is a lot younger than we are. So there you go. In terms of the other countries, so the countries, AMX 10RC, there we go. In terms of the other European countries, again, the exact number of tanks they're going to be sending, we don't know yet. A number of countries are already stepping forward. I think the Norwegians have and others. Thank you guys for the gifts there, the L for the hearts and the various cakes. The Norwegians have stepped forward. A number of the other ones are stepping forward. Possibly 80 to 100 Leopard tanks are coming from Europe. For starters, that includes the German tanks, but it's just not really clear. I don't think we know the exact numbers yet. As I said, you've got 14 of the British tanks. You've got the French light tanks. The Swedes, by the way, has said in the last day that they will consider sending their, Stridsvagner 122 tanks to Ukraine as well. So you've got a lot of different tanks coming. The Ukrainians have said they want 300 to 500 tanks. That is not the number that's coming. We are talking with the Leopards. If we're lucky, maybe 100 tanks will be coming in the next 3 months or so. It takes time to train and then time to actually, it was interesting actually reading up on the training here. So let's start with the two different kinds of tanks, okay? Thank you, nothing for you, for the dancer there. You've got the American tanks and the German tanks are the two sort of biggest shipments coming, okay? You've got to train the Ukrainians how to actually drive these tanks. You've got to train the Ukrainians how to maintain these tanks. That means engineers and others. You've got to train them how to repair these tanks, okay? The logistics of these tanks, getting them fuel, refueling, all that kind of stuff. Then you also, and I was wondering about this, and this was something that I was reading today as well, is the Ukrainians, it's not just a matter of, and this was something I think General Hertling, who I talk a lot about, former American general, commander in Europe, a very smart guy. He does a lot of television on this stuff. Hertling has been saying that you've got to realize that even once we train the Ukrainians, thank you, Chris, for the hat there, they also are going to need to train on sort of a combined arms approach. In other words, he said, it's one thing to train them to actually, drive the tank. He goes, that they can learn. I mean, granted, the German tanks will be easier to learn than the American tanks to drive, but then they've got to incorporate it into their larger military force and figure out the strategy. In other words, and military folks among us could probably tell you better than I can, but any of you who have played war games know what I'm talking about. You've got planes, you've got tanks, you've got fighting vehicles, you've got troops, infantry walking on the ground, you've got helicopters, right? Maybe you've got ships as well, but you've got drones. All of these things have to, artillery, all of these things have to work together. And that's part of the challenge of integrating tanks into Ukraine's military effort is they've got to learn to drive them, but they've also got to learn how to integrate them into the system. Anyway, Hertling says this is going to take a while. And he thinks probably 6 months at least. is going to take in terms of, yeah, actually, I know Pistol Pete. I'm going to mention that in a second. It's going to take about 6 months, he thinks, at least, for the Abrams tanks to get on the front lines. Now, it's funny. Pistol Pete mentioned something that actually Hertling mentions this quote a lot. He says, "Amateurs talk strategy and tactics, professionals talk logistics." It's a military saying, which is basically, when you look at new weapon systems, don't just think of how you're going to use them. Don't just think, hey, this is great. I've got a new tank or I've got a new plane. What can we do? Oh, let's go and we can blow up, right? We can blow up ammunition depots or whatever, right? It's also a matter of how you're going to fuel them, how you're going to repair them, how you're going to keep your troops fed. That basically the logistics is what keeps your army running or keeps your army dying. In the case of the Russians with that first invasion, the initial invasion, remember when the Russians had so many problems around Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, because their logistics just broke down, and it broke down in part because the Ukrainians were effectively attacking it. So it wasn't just, Deus ex machina, like the hand of God came down and broke the Russian logistics. The Russian logistics was terrible anyway. But I was just thinking of this. Rachel just put a little note requesting to sing Happy Birthday to Zelensky. And Rachel, the one thing I got worried about is, and I forgot about this, happy birthday. Get this, folks may not be aware of this. Around the world, like Americans were aware of it because you notice it on TV shows. The Happy Birthday song, that song, it's copyrighted or trademarked or whatever it is. We're not allowed to sing it. Like on TV shows, you will notice how whenever Happy Birthday comes up on American TV shows, they don't sing Happy Birthday. They sing For He's a Jolly Good Fellow or something like that, but they don't sing the Happy Birthday song because legally they can't, because they have to pay rights for it every time they do it. Anyway, I was thinking about this today, so I'm going to skip the Zelensky song because I don't want to get a little issue with my YouTube, but we'll all say happy birthday to Mr. Zelensky, okay? Paul Gray is saying Biden said 31 tanks is equivalent to 1 Ukrainian battalion. Is this number correct? I'm assuming it's correct because that's what Biden said. I did see that. I also saw that they were talking about the Germans possibly sending as many as 2 battalion of tanks to Ukraine. Thank you, Bonnie, for Bonnie's putting up a birthday cake for Zelensky. That's what it was on TikTok. I appreciate the gift and also the Zelensky gift. That's cute. The Germans were talking about possibly eventually 2 battalions of tanks that they were sending, which is why some of the people that I was reading said they think the Germans may end up sending 80 tanks or so of just their Germans alone, which would be great. Because if you get Germany 80 tanks, if you get Europe the rest of Europe, maybe another, I don't know, 80 tanks, 100 tanks. Now you're getting 180. That's getting a more real number. America sends, what did we say, 31? At least for starters, 31. Hopefully America's sending more. The Brits send 14 for starters. Altogether, that could get us to the 150, 200 tanks. Now, in terms of the timing of all of this, as I said, the Germans said that they plan to have, actually, I just read this before I came on with you guys. The latest from the Germans is they're saying that they plan to have the tanks on the ground, and that the quote from them was integrated into the battlefield by the end of March. Now, that is great and significant because the big battles that are coming up are, we anticipate, nobody knows because nobody's going to say publicly, certainly from the Ukrainian side. The big battles coming up are that the Ukrainians are planning on launching some attacks to get their land back. One big thought is, certainly the Russians are worried about this, but you see a lot of commentators in the West suggesting it as well, is that the Ukrainians may try to take back Zaporizhia province, a portion of which is occupied by the Russians. That's right here. Now, why would they want this back, in addition to it belonging to Ukraine? I mean, there's an obvious reason, but why go after it first? Because if you look at the territory that Russia controls, okay, Russia controls this. Crimea in the south, they invaded and took in 2014, and then all of this land in southern Ukraine. Well, there's a land bridge here. There's actually water here, and then Russia is over here, and Russia is all over here. Here's water, and then here's Russia with a land bridge. The actual bridge, I should say, when I say a land bridge, I mean a bridge over the water. I don't mean a land bridge. Bridge over the water. That's the bridge that the Ukrainians, we assume it's the Ukrainians, attacked several months ago, and it put the bridge out of commission mostly for a while. The actual land bridge, meaning land connection the Russians have to Crimea, is through here. It's through Ukraine. This is isolated in the water by one little bridge, and the Russians are not very happy about that. Well, now that they control southern Ukraine, the Russians always wanted to basically extend Russia, steal southern Ukraine, call it Russia, and extend their land through here so they had a land bridge to Crimea, which is the big jewel they always wanted to steal from the Ukrainians, and they did, okay? Well, if the Ukrainians were to invade Zaporizhia province and invade and take back this land here, all of a sudden what happens? They cut off here, and especially here, from the road connections to Russia. That would be a big deal. And that would be really painful for the Russians and make it much harder for the Russians to defend Crimea, which everyone thinks is sort of the ultimate, thank you, Benji, which everyone thinks is sort of the ultimate goal of what Putin would like to go after. Obviously, he wants all of the land back, Putin. I was going to call him Brzezinski. I'm getting stuck in my old age here. Zelensky. What Zelensky wants is all of the Ukrainian land back, but he really wants Crimea back. That's the crown jewel of the Ukrainian territory they want back. Now, 6 Evo is saying, would you consider the recent news escalation to World War III? Well, I mean, I'm not worried about World War III. We've talked about that a lot. As far as World War III, the issue, the concept of the World War III threat is, oh my God, the Russians will get so freaked out that they'll have to use nuclear weapons. And the problem is the Russians really aren't winning this. They're not doing well. They're having a hard time beating Ukraine. And there is no way in hell the Russians could beat NATO. Okay. I mean, on its face, even if you think Russia's winning, which very few people I think Russia's winning, if they're winning very slowly, right? Clearly, Russia thought they were going to win this in 3 to 10 days. We just hit the 11-month anniversary. Clearly, this is very hard for Russia. Imagine if Russia, oh, thank you. Is that Lieutenant Baxter? That was very cool. Thank you for that. Imagine if Russia had to fight not just Ukraine, but had to fight 30 NATO countries, possibly plus 2, Finland and Sweden, but 30 NATO countries and fight all of our weapons. Currently, the Russians are fighting Russian tanks, Soviet tanks, which are what the Ukrainians have. Currently, they're not fighting Western aircraft either, right? They're not fighting Western bombs, some Western bombs, but not a lot. They're certainly not fighting Western cruise missiles. They're not having to deal with our tanks and the missiles that come from the tanks. The Russians would be destroyed if they launched a war against us. The best outcome for the Russians, meaning the best that they could achieve if they attacked the West, would be nuclear war that killed everybody in Russia and the West. That's not really winning, right? I mean, if you're advising Russia, you're going, well, the best you could do is kill yourselves with us. If you're a military leader or a political leader, you kind of go, well, that kind of sucks, right? That's not really a viable option. That's why I don't think there's going to be World War III. There will be World War III if we use nuclear weapons, yeah. But short of that, there's just no reason. So yeah, no, I think, and by the way, I think what you just suggested, Evo, was some of the concern that people like Biden and other Western leaders had. It's why initially, at least, you didn't see America providing any of these weapons, right? Even Stingers, we didn't want to provide at the beginning. We didn't want to provide Patriot missiles. We didn't want to provide the HIMARS, right? None of that did we want to provide. And as each step went along, we started to get more and more comfortable that the Russians were just bluffing. And finally, we're at the point now where we're giving the tanks. And again, all the Russians, what did the Russians do again today? I didn't even write it down because it wasn't worth getting into it. They threatened nuclear war again. Now, mind you, they're pissed. Oh, the Russians are pissed. They're very upset that Germany is getting these tanks. And, you know, it's, I mean, what do you do if you're Russian at this point? The war isn't going well. And I was going to say, let me kind of scroll down here to what I was going to say with some of this. Actually, let me tell you really quick, and then I'm going to talk about why the tanks matter. In terms of the impact, this is massively important for Ukrainian morale, right? The Ukrainians are basically going, yes, right? Thank God, from the Ukrainian perspective. If you're Russian, you're not happy. You're not happy. The Western tanks are so much better than the Russian tanks, and we'll talk about that in a minute. B, this shows that the Western resolve is still there, right? The West is not falling apart. The Germans, right? The Russians were very happy that this whole thing was going on with Germany. Thank you, Yorub. Was going on with Germany with the last couple of weeks. Well, America came around. Germany came around. We are now one. We are now one fist, right? NATO. And Ukraine is getting weapons that nobody thought we were going to be providing every step of the way, right? And frankly, what comes next? What comes next is going to be long-range rockets and planes eventually. So if you're Russian, you're not very happy right now. Another point that the Russians have to worry about, if the Russians are planning, which everyone thinks they are, a big offensive in the spring, whether it's March, whether it's April or later, but a really big counterattack against the Ukrainians. At that point, the Russians now have to put into their military calculation these tanks. They now have to assume these tanks are going to be on the ground. Well, the problem for the Russians is multiple. One, it just increased the cost of the Russians going to not just going to war. I mean, they're at war, but it increased the cost of the Russians doing this counteroffensive in the spring, because any battle planner's got to say, okay, how many of our men are we going to lose? How many are they going to lose? If we lose this many men, can we still win? Right? How much land can we take? Thank you, Flower Lady. This complicates that. So the Russian war planning now got more complicated. Two, whether the Russians even do it becomes more complicated, right? So that becomes, oh boy, we've already got a. Hey, anybody got access to Twitch that we can go and get the crazy person? Seems like we have a spammer over on Twitch. If somebody wants to, I gave some of you guys access. I don't know whether we've got anybody who's got the Twitch access. If not, we'll live. But we got a little spammer over on Twitch. What was I going to say? Oh, but the more costly to Russia. Final point. Russia may have to speed up its spring. Thank you, Jingle. Okay, I knew I must have. Thank you. I'm glad I had empowered you to do this a while ago. Thanks, Jingle. The final point I was going to mention about this. Thank you, Danka. Oh, Danka, that's cute. Considering we're talking Germany today, is the what was I going to say? Oh, Russia's speeding up its offensive. If you're Russia, you're not only taking into account what do you do with these tanks coming, right? You know, you've now got to take into account the Germans, the Ukrainians may have a lot more tanks, good Western tanks. You've now got to say, do we speed up our invasion, our counterattack, to try to counterattack before those tanks get there? Well, if you do, that is kind of a pain, because, you know, if you're Russia, if you're any smart military, you attack when it is best for you, right? You attack when you have the most advantage. You don't attack because the other guy changed your timetable and is rushing you. Ukraine is now rushing Russia. Is pushing Russia to do this faster. Thank you, Coeur de Leon, for that. Because the Russians are trying to get in there. They want to get in there and have their counteroffensive before these tanks get there, which means Russia could very well attack too soon. Thank you, Maggie. Too soon, meaning they don't have enough men in place. They don't have as many weapons in place. Their men aren't as rested. Their logistics aren't set up well enough. But the weather may not be as amenable. So anyway, that's another advantage of what's going on with these tanks, which is great. Let me tell you really quick, a quick little break from our Discord auction. So we do auctions on the Discord. It's another way I ask for folks to help out. We've got a Discord community that's a lot of fun. Discord.aravosis.com. You can find it via the link in my, thank you, Big King, the link in my TikTok profile. You click through and the Discord's there. For the rest of you, you can find it via aravosis.com or discord.aravosis.com. But one of the cool things we do on the Discord is we have auctions. And with the auctions, I use it to basically finance my work, but also we use it to help out Ukraine. And I wanted to show you guys a quick picture because this is really cool. 50% of the auction revenue, we're selling cool stuff we get from Ukraine. We buy it in Ukraine, get it shipped here. And 50% of the revenue goes to support my work because I am doing this for free, full time. Thank you, Sam, I am. 50% of it, though, we channel back into Ukraine. A lot of it's been humanitarian aid, buying help for kids, people with disabilities, you name it. Well, Vlad just sent me, and I mentioned this to you guys the other day, some of the recent auction money. Vlad knows soldiers at the front, my friend Vlad in Ukraine, who's been coordinating all this for us. And the weather there has been freezing, but just above freezing. So it's horrible. It's cold. It's been raining nonstop. And he said the troops at the front need boots that can basically, winter boots aren't enough. They need boots for like rain in the winter, which they weren't expecting. So Vlad took a bunch of the proceeds from the auctions and he bought something, I think he said 60 pairs of boots, of rubber boots. These are the actual troops showing off the boots, thanking you guys from the front. We had to hide their faces for security reasons. So those faces are of the actual Ukrainian troops. but those are the Ukrainian troops with the actual boots that we've helped pay with your guys' auction proceeds, which was neat. But it was very cool. Yeah, I thought it was very sweet. And Vlad said actually some of the other proceeds were used to buy drones, like several drones for the soldiers as well, which we helped out on. Thank you, Bonnie, for that. The other thing I'll show you really quick, some of the other stuff we are still auctioning off. We've got maybe 5 more of these, I think. That's all we've got. These are no longer made. They're the Ukrainian government is making these commemorative bracelets for the Azovstal steel plant. You can see the steel, and then there's the Ukrainian trident on it. And these, the Ukrainian government made from the last steel produced by the Azovstal steel plant. That's the steel plant where the 2,000 Ukrainians were holed up against the 14,000 Russians for several months. And in order to honor the heroes, the Ukrainian government made these bracelets, sold them. We bought several of them. They did another run, and now there's no more. They're not making any more. So we've got these. We're selling them. Same deal. Any profit, we're splitting 50-50, channeling back into Ukraine and then using it for me to keep doing the show. But we've got those on there. And then my favorite, which I have to show you again, this auction, we've got a few of these. This particular auction ends tomorrow. Cool little box from Ukraine, Orc Busters. The Ukrainians call the Russian troops orcs, based on J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, orcs. Literally, that's what they call them, orcs. And in the box is, among a description showing where this is from, 2 pieces of titanium shot down Russian Air Force jet. How's that cool? Shot down near Kharkiv, Ukraine. So this has been doing quite well in the auction. We have a few boxes that I bought and had shipped from Ukraine. Very excited for these. So that one auction ends tomorrow. But Hex Chrome Primer, I wasn't sure what it is. I assumed it was some kind of a primer on it because, well, you can see there's the sort of the color on one side and then the back. And the holes are basically the drill holes. We had sort of experts look at the drill holes. We wish they were bullet holes. They are drill holes. Nonetheless, it's pretty cool. Well, we're auctioning them off. We're just auctioning them. So the price is whatever people are willing to pay. Right now, it's the, and I swear I'll get back to the news right now, but the way we do it is, there's VIP auctions and regular auctions. VIP are for people who pay to be our patrons. You do that via Patreon, patreon.com/Aravosis. The public auctions are for everybody, even if you don't pay. This one currently is in the VIP, but next week I will do one as a public auction for everybody else. It just takes longer. I mean, meaning you're competing against more people in the public auction. That's the only downside. But I want to make it available. I'll stop explaining the details now. There's a Ukrainian nonprofit charity that's raised several $100,000s for the troops. They certify it. Vlad knows them. I mean, my friend Vlad knows the woman running it. She certifies it as real. That's as far as you can go. There's nobody to, thanks for the gift there. There's no other way to get, an official Vladimir Zelensky seal of approval, but it's a Ukrainian charity. When you donate $200 to the charity, they basically give you this as a thank you. So we donated $200 several times over to get the boxes, and then we're auctioning them off. So there you go. Discord.aravosis.com is where the auction is. All right, let me keep going. Mods, you can sort of help folks find it if they're still asking. So why do these tanks matter? So we're talking today about the fact that America and the UK, America and the Germans have just announced, thank you, Nathan, have just announced that they're going to be sending American Abrams tanks and German Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, and the Germans are going to let the rest of the Europeans send their Leopard 2 tanks as well to Ukraine. And the question is why these tanks matter. And by the way, also throw in the French, the UK, the British tanks, the Challenger 2. The French are light tanks, so I'm not sure if they're in exactly the same category. Thank you, Annie, for the hat. But I know the French are thinking of sending Leclerc tanks as well, which are their main battle tank. That would be in the same category of the really good tanks. Listen to this. This was from Sky News. And they asked retired Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell, basically meaning the British Air Force for our purposes, for in American terms, what the issue was with these tanks. What was so good about these tanks going over from the West? He said, a direct comparison. Most of the Russian T-62, T-64, and T-72 tanks, which the Ukrainians are also using, Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union, remember, which Russia was a part of. So most of Ukraine's weapons are the same weapons that the Soviets had, the Russians have. So a lot of their tanks are the same, even though they would have been upgraded as time goes on, and they would have been upgraded differently, obviously, because the Russians wouldn't necessarily help the Ukrainians after that. Most of the tanks the Russians have, which the Ukrainians are also using, are vintage 1960s. They're from the 1960s. They've been around for a long time. He says that they're bulletproof. If you shoot bullets at them, they won't go through, but they're no match for modern weapons. They've been witnessed. There are now thousands littered over the battlefields. Now, specifically, a lot of the military folks will tell you that I know in America, but I guess around the world, a lot of us, laymen got to see these tanks in action, the American tanks, the Abrams, in the Gulf War, the first Gulf War against Saddam Hussein in 1991. The Americans chopped up the Iraqi tanks. Those were Soviet/Russian tanks they were using, and the American tanks and American machinery destroyed them. People were telling me, I don't know if you guys, if this is correct, but some of the military folks were telling me it was like on the order of 50-1 or something in terms of how many of our tanks were killed versus how many of theirs. I mean, it was a disaster, absolutely disaster. Oh no, definitely thank France as well. I was just wondering though on whether the light tanks wouldn't be in the same category of defense though, as far as getting attacked, whether they would hold up as well. The modern tanks, even though Leopard 2, so he says modern tanks, even though Leopard 2 and Challenger 2 and Abrams, the German, the British, and the American tanks are 30 to 40 years old, the amount of armor has increased, which makes them a lot more survivable. But it's the power of the punch. It's the power of that gun. And Challenger 2 is a really good example. He's talking about now, our tanks are much more survivable, which is great. They've got armor that helps the Abrams, for example, at least, I believe it's reactive armor. At least that's what it used to be called. But basically armor that if something, if incoming round blows up, the armor blows up to a degree and tries to force the blast out. That's, again, my layman's understanding of it, so that the force of the blast goes away and not towards the tank and causes even more damage, right? Another thing we did on our tanks, which is very smart, on the Russian tanks, and it's really idiotic, and you've seen videos of this and pictures of this. I forgot, do they call it a Christmas tree, or I forget what they call it when it blows up, but basically the Russians, incredibly stupidly, the ammunition for the tank, because the tanks typically have several different kinds of guns, right? The Abrams, I think, has, I forget how many it has, 2 or 3. The Bradley has 3. I forget what the Abrams has. But the Russians put the ammunition for the guns around the turret, right? So the turret is, the big honking gun is on a round thing and it turns around on the tank, right? Well, the big circle where the crew climbs in, underneath it and surrounding it is all the ammunition. So if you hit the top of a Russian tank, the ammunition goes off, and what does it do? The ammunition is literally under the men. It blows up, kills them, and throws the turret. The turret now has the gun, the big gun, throws it into the air hugely. I've seen videos. Exactly, the videos are brutal. I've seen a lot of videos of this. It's horrific. I mean, how high this stuff goes, horrific. Well, it also guarantees you're going to kill everybody. Ours do not do that. Ours and the French and everybody, the Germans as well. From what I was looking at, the ammunition I think was now in the back of the tank I was seeing, so it's away in different compartments. So at least hopefully there's more of a chance of the crew surviving, and then you get the better armor we've got too. Now correct, yeah. Fender was a Fender Squire player is talking about the Hellfire missile. The U.S., not even the U.S., the missiles that we've been providing. Thank you, Inspired Woman. Oh, that's the cool one that has the different postcard at the end of each one, I think. Thank you for that. The weapons that we've been providing the Ukrainians, all of us collectively, not just America, the NLAWs, the Javelins, which I think aren't the Javelins from the Brits? I think I'm forgetting who makes what. A lot of these weapons go up and then come down on the tanks. And the idea is just that the top of the tank is less protected. And in the Russian case, a missile comes down on the top and you're setting off the ammunition and the entire tank goes up. It's nasty stuff, but what do you do? The NLAWs are British. Okay. Are the Javelins not British as well? Just out of curiosity, give credit while credit is due here. Okay, Javelins are the U.S. and the NLAWs are British. Okay, gotcha. Thanks, guys. Oh, hang on, quick. B. Smith had a quick question here. This is a good question. Why hasn't Russia used their Air Force in Ukraine? Russia does use their Air Force in Ukraine. Thank you, Sig Sauer, for that. The problem is that neither country got air superiority. Well, there's two different things. I keep forgetting this. There's air superiority and there's air something else. They're two different things, but they're related. The idea is control of the airspace. Neither country was able to get control of the airspace, so neither country is able to stop the other from flying over it. Now, it's dangerous for both of them. Air dominance? Okay, thanks. Air dominance and air superiority. I am not going to try to tell you the difference between the two, but bottom line is neither's been able to do it. I am not an expert on the Air Force. I don't know why neither's been able to. But I do know, I know at the beginning, for example, part of the reason the Russians weren't able to is because I believe the US government had the electronic intelligence, or however our intelligence, had found out that the Russians were going to be attacking and making a main base out of the, is it Hostomel Air Base right north of Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital? So the Ukrainians had a lot of their planes there. They flew their planes away like hours before the Russians attacked. So the Ukrainians were able to get their planes out of there and save their Air Force. But for that, the Russians might have been able to take out a significant chunk of the Ukrainian Air Force. But that really begs the larger question of, when you think of Russia, okay, Russia before February 24th when they invaded, you think of Russia, thank you, Pierre Marine, as having a really kick-ass Air Force, right? I mean, you think, wow, the Russian military, the Russian Air Force is right. I mean, they've got their MiGs that are, comparable. Our planes are better, but that these are comparable armies, that they fight each other. And if the U.S. Air Force was fighting the Russian Air Force, they both would do really well. I mean, again, I think we used to think, even if we thought ours are better, we thought the Russians would give us a run for their money, right? That they would be a tough battle to fight. The Russians weren't even able to defeat the Ukrainian Air Force, and they haven't been able to. I don't know enough about it, but I'd be very curious. When we get to the Q&A, which I want to do soon anyway, because there's so much news today, I'd be curious for some of you military folks to maybe weigh in, because I think it's really interesting question as to what the hell happened with the Russian Air Force. Or is it just like everything else? Their equipment isn't as good and their soldiers aren't as good. And maybe the logistics aren't as good, that they're also not taking care of the planes and everything else. Tell you really quick here. You know what? I think it's good enough on that. I'm going to call it quits here. Not quits, to get to the questions. Let me tell you quick little other news. Israel's being really a pain in the butt. We tried to get them to transfer old Hawk anti-aircraft missiles that Israel bought from the US. Israel doesn't even use them anymore. Israel refused to transfer them to Ukraine. Great ally we've got there. Turkey is going to send the Bayraktar maker that makes the Bayraktar drones. Turkey is going to send 2 drones for free to the Ukrainians, which is nice. Slovakia is ready to talk about the transfer of Soviet-made MiG-29s to Ukraine. Putin is talking about, at least our intelligence is saying Putin is considering an additional mobilization of 200,000 men, but he's going to do it quietly because he doesn't want to upset the Russians. So basically, he's just going to slowly be adding more men to the military. And get this, hope nobody notices, which is insane, but nonetheless. And the final thing, I had to tell you this one because it's a really funny story. Thank you, Samantha. In response to the German and American tanks and the British tanks and the French light tanks and possibly the Swedish tanks, basically all of Europe now coming together on the tank issue, which is great. I mean, everybody gets credit for this at this point. The Russians are responding by possibly rushing into the field their T-14 main battle tank, which is a new tank, and it's their really big, scary tank. And I told you guys about this before. The British Ministry of Defense wrote a thing about this today and put it public. And what they said, I'll just read you what they said. As previously reported, Russia has worked to prepare a small number of T-14 Armata main battle tanks for the type's first operational deployment in Ukraine. However, in recent months, deployed Russian forces were reluctant to accept the first tranche of T-14 allocated to them because the vehicles were in such poor condition. It's unclear exactly what aspects of the vehicles prompted this reaction, but within the last 3 years, Russian officials have publicly described problems with the T-14's engines and thermal imaging systems. In 2021, Defense Minister Shoigu described the planned production run for 2022 as only an experimental industrial batch. So they were only going to build a handful as an experiment. They weren't even meant to be final tanks, okay? Therefore, it is unlikely that any deployed T-14 tanks will have met the usual standards for new equipment to be deemed operational. They're talking about putting some new tank in that hasn't been fully tested and that was meant to be like a prototype, basically, like a test thing. Well, the commanders apparently don't even want to use them because they know they're bad. So that's the Russian response, which I thought was kind of hysterical. Oh, thank you, Hazel. That's a very generous one. I appreciate that, and fun as well. All right, let's get rolling. We had a lot of, I didn't mean that there was so much news today. I'll go a little bit later today. We can skip the Discord today. Why don't we do that? And I'll stay late, maybe 10 minutes or so extra since we were late on the, since I was doing so much news today. Also keep in mind, thank you, Ellie. I do have a Patreon. Thank you, dear Benji. Patreon is a nice way you can support creators. Most of the money goes to the creator. You know, we lose like 10% or 15%. It's not great, but what do you do? But it's a nice way that you can support a creator. Thank you, Hazel. Everyone's going nuts today. Thank you, Hazel. Everyone's the gifts on TikTok are out of control. Thank you, Hazel. It's a way that you can support creators on a monthly basis, which is nice. You know, and just be able to give a contribution each month, $5, whatever. But in my case, the Patreon contributors also then become VIP contributors on the Discord, which doesn't give you too much, but it does give you, thank you guys for the Duke for the goggles and Magic for the heart. It does give you the VIP auction, which is nice, and some other things. If you give more money, you know, you get more benefits. Thank you, Bonnie, including some private sessions that I do with folks and everything else. Thank you, Happy Beach. Oh, lots of gifts on TikTok, but it's patreon.com/Aravosis. Aravosis.com for the YouTubers, etc. The rest of you can, again, find it in my profile. It's just easy. Go to my profile on TikTok, look at the link. All my links are there. So yeah, let's jump right in. So for TikTok questions, use the Q&A link in my profile. Let me look and see, because I know you guys have been giving sort of feedback on stuff. I would like some of the military expertise on this. Oh God, I don't think I know how to do the Nachischronia Pola, Kemegalihara. It's the Greek version of Happy Birthday to You that we sing in the States. And I only know the first two lines, which is Nachischronia Pola, Kemegalihara. That's all I know. I don't know the rest of it. So we'll do that because today is President Zelensky's 45th birthday. So let me see here. Oh, interesting. Okay, Copies is weighing in a little bit about the planes. We were talking about what is it that makes the Russians, why didn't the Russians get control of the airspace, of the Ukrainian airspace? Copies is saying, first, the Russian pilots are not training enough, and especially not for combined operations. Thank you, Crusher. Combined operations, I told you guys earlier, is basically, okay, various planes working together, right? Like we were saying A-10 Warthogs, an American plane, that's a tank killer. Well, it's very slow and cumbersome. It needs other planes to protect it. That's combined arms right there. Like, how are you working with other arms? How are you working with arms on the ground, with artillery, with tanks, with troops, with drones? Basically, how are you all working? Honestly, it's like playing a war game. Really. I mean, again, if you haven't played war games on your computers, you won't know what I mean, but anybody who has knows exactly what I mean. You've got all sorts of different equipment and men and planes and tanks and submarines and nuclear weapons. And how do you use all of those in principle in a coordinated manner? So Copies is saying the Russians are not very good in training at using them in a combined way. They are hiding out of the reach of Ukraine's anti-aircraft batteries and rockets. But why they weren't able to take them out is the thing, you know? Hi, Spire. Glad you joined us. Spire was making chicken tortilla for soup for dinner. Glad you joined us. All right, let me see what else. Just looking back a little bit at anything else you guys were saying on planes. Interesting. Yeah, Otambot was also saying Poland may donate MiG-29s to Ukraine for F-16s from the U.S., meaning the U.S. provides F-16s to Poland and Poland gives its MiG-29s to Ukraine. Western countries may also donate F-16s, yes, someday, to Poland and Ukraine as newer fighters are replaced. Have the recent donations of tanks paved the way for this? You know, first of all, MiGs are more likely before F-16s, right? So Ukraine being given Soviet weapons that it already flies is a much greater possibility than getting American weapons or British or French, what is it, French Mirages, at least they used to be, right? But our fighter jets, because it's not an I mean, if you're worried about escalation, right? It's not an escalation to give Ukraine weapons it already has, right? So Ukraine already uses MiG fighter jets. We're simply giving them more MiG fighter jets. Having said that, remember at the beginning of the war, Poland wanted to give Ukraine, I forget how many, but they wanted to give Ukraine their MiG-29s, and America and the Germans both flipped out and freaked out and went, and then it never happened. So clearly there was originally a concern about escalation. What I think the tanks do two things. It's kind of a chicken and egg situation with the tanks. Okay. The tanks are going to Ukraine because we are increasingly realizing that the emperor has no clothes. Okay. Russia is the boy who cried nuke, right? That they keep threatening, oh, we're going to be very angry if you give better weapons to Ukraine. And then we give better weapons and what happens? Nothing. I mean, they bomb more, but they've been bombing anyway, right? So by the part of the reason we're giving the tanks, not part of the reasons, a lot of the reason we're giving the tanks is because we realize that the Russian threat was BS. Okay. By giving the tanks and seeing that the Russians are now not, again, hey, we're not going to have, I guarantee you, we're not going to have nuclear. Well, okay. I guess if I'm wrong, nobody can hold me to it, but I guarantee you in the next 3 months, we're not going to have nuclear war when those tanks arrive in Ukraine. That will then create an even greater perception in the West that the Russians are simply bluffing, right? So each new weapon system comes because we are less afraid of the Russians. We think they're bluffing. And each new weapon system proves even more that the Russians are bluffing because they don't do anything other than, again, they're already doing carnage. They're already killing Ukrainian civilians. I mean, there's nothing more they could do really at this point. So yeah, that's my take. Sorry, looking here and more of and then I will pull up some of the TikTok questions. Don't worry. Doesn't really matter why we're giving. I'm glad we're giving the tanks. Long we're giving the tanks works for me. Spire is saying on training the M1 crewmen, the M1 is the American Abrams tank. The U.S. Army takes 10 weeks out of a 16-week training school to turn a civilian into a tanker with minimal skills. Okay, that's good because the Ukrainians are already tankers, a lot of them. Since you were busy making your tortilla soup, one of the things I was telling folks is General Hertling, who's a very well-known American general, retired. He was saying that his, maybe not concern, but his caveat to tell people with the American tanks was, thank you, Gary Burke, was he goes, yeah, there's training in how to drive the tank, but they're going to need combined arms training as well that he felt was going to be additional beyond this initial 10-week training or whatever it is, that the combined arms training was going to be a whole other level. And he was also very worried about the logistics training, that as well he thought was going to be much harder. Not much harder, was going to attenuate this. Finally, and I don't know, no one has said this, whether where are we getting the tanks from? And how long will they take to get to Ukraine? The tanks are huge, but then again, America has experience moving them, of course. The bigger issue is some of the tanks we have the depleted uranium armor on them. Apparently, we do not want to export our tanks with depleted Ukrainium. That would be. I was like that. That's the newest. That's how we could honor Ukraine. We have to add an element to the periodic table for Ukraine. Ukrainium, but depleted uranium, and we would need to remove that stuff from some of our tanks if those tanks were going to Ukraine. I just don't know. I don't know what. How long, in other words, what is the determining factor for getting American tanks to Ukraine? Now, I will say this too with the American tanks. This is just my gut on this, but it makes sense logically. Thank you, Addie, for the gift there. I think it just makes sense logically. Part of the reason the Americans are holding off with the tanks and saying we're going to do the German tanks for the first 3 months is for efficiency of the warfighting effort. Rather than training Ukraine, rather than saying, okay, Ukraine has this number of tankers, right, of men that drive tanks or assist in driving tanks. Women too. They have women in the Ukrainian military. Rather than train all these people, thank you, Crusher, on the Leopards, the German tanks, let's train some of them on the American tanks, some of them on the British tanks, some of them on the French light tanks, some of them on the Leopard, the German tank, right? Like all of a sudden they're training on everything, worrying about this big offensive from the Russians that could start as early as March or April. What you ought to do, I would think, just for like economies of scale and everything else, is train the Ukrainians on the biggest number of tanks you've got as soon as possible, and those are German tanks. The quickest we can get them are German tanks, not American tanks. And let's train them on those in the next 12 weeks. And then afterwards, well, actually, supposedly we are going to start some training anyway, I think, of Abrams in the next few weeks. But if we focus more on that, Ukraine can get the logistics down for that, right? Get all the people in line to gasoline. I mean, they need diesel fuel. They need, right, everything. So I wonder if that's, all I'm saying is, I wonder if that's part of the issue of why we heard today that American tanks wouldn't be showing up for 6 months, that was intentional, because we wanted to say, you know what, let's get the German tanks in there. Let's get them to incorporate the German tanks, learn to use them, and not have too many new tanks at once that just will screw up the Ukrainian logistics. Anyway, one of the reasons, at least, I think. Thank you, Edsel. Oh, hey, Edsel, how you doing? Thank you for that. Let me pull up Tiki Toki here. What was that? Where was I? Oh, no, that's all right. Let me see here. TikTok question. Q&A. I heard a report they're going to start training Ukrainian tankers before the tanks arrive. Well, yes, this was something we heard last week. It was already agreed last week when NATO got to, well, not just NATO, when the allies of Ukraine, because it included, North Africans, et cetera, that even before the German tank issue was resolved, that they were going to start training Ukrainians on how to use the German tanks. So that was already agreed to. I did read that possibly in the next few weeks, there may already be some training happening with the Abrams tanks as well. I don't know what's going on with the British tanks, although, am I wrong that some of the British tanks are already arriving? I thought I read today, but I'm getting a little confused of the Bradleys versus the British tanks. Now, the Bradleys are interesting too, because the Bradley fighting vehicle is American. I believe we've now committed 109 of those. They are tank killers, which is great because they'll destroy Russian tanks, but they're not as, on the defense, they're not as good. So you wouldn't want to put them up against a Russian tank and then have the Russians destroy them. That would be bad. But learning to use, and this is where combined arms comes in, right? Learning to use the Bradley vehicles with tanks, with other things, so that you can protect the Bradleys and sort of multiply the force of all of them together is great. But let's not forget that there's other vehicles coming, the French light tanks, the German Marder infantry fighting vehicle. The Ukrainians have a lot of other cool weapons coming as well, which is great at the same time. Yep. No, I think so, Solak. Yeah. Yeah, I think exactly. I think it's just part of the logistics. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Carla, for the pinata. That was cool. Thank you. I think for the logistics, part of it just makes sense that it makes it easier spreading it out over time. Yeah. Yeah. Nothing. Iran moving troops into South America. Haven't even heard about it. I wasn't paying attention to it, but I am Greek, a Greek American. Yes. Heleno Americanos. I think so. Do you think the tank news today will make Russia try to attack Ukraine and take land before all these tanks arrive? I think so. I mean, also look at the way Putin sort of governs with his military. I mean, we know Putin does this kind of, I don't care, you're going to do it by this date, kind of your image of a really bad leader. clearly the war itself he started without enough men present. So I would not be surprised if Putin responds to this by saying, well, if the tanks are coming by the end of March, then we need to start our offensive the beginning of March. And his people are going, well, we're not going to have enough weapons in place. We're not going to have enough trained men in place. The ground is going to be mushy and wet and a marsh. So our weapons potentially are going to get stuck on the ground, right? All of that. And Putin says, I don't care. Make it happen, or I'll find somebody who can, right? So that would be my thing. Let me see here. Why is World War III? Oh, I'll tell you why. Why is World War III trending on Twitter? I'm kind of concerned. It's trending exclusively because of the Russians. I would guarantee you, and I will guarantee you, good money has been spent on it trending. Final point too. World War III isn't going to happen because of a hashtag on Twitter. Don't worry. But I always tell people, don't worry. Do not worry about World War III. The Russians can't win. Again, nobody wins World War III, and the Russians know it. They're not going to do it. There's just literally no reason for them to do it. They can't use nuclear weapons because then everybody dies. So why would they do it? I mean, they're not. Right? Whether they're bad at they may be bad at this, but they're not suicidal. Putin doesn't want to die. The Russian generals don't want to die. They don't want to wipe Russia off the map. They're not going to do it. Or at least I would challenge folks, if anytime somebody brings that up, to say to them, okay, tell me the logical military strategy involved in Putin using nuclear weapons. How does it get him from A to B, right? He wants to achieve something in this war. How does using nukes get him to the next stage of the war? It doesn't. It just doesn't. And worst of all, this is where too, like every time the Russians say, we are going to drop nuclear weapons on Berlin and this kind of stuff, and you're like, and then the French and the Americans and the Brits nuke you and we all die and you all die. So you're not going to drop nuclear weapons on Berlin. I mean, well, I do know why they're doing it. They're doing it to freak people out. No, they're doing it because look, a lot of people, understandably, when you hear that, the Russians are threatening to nuke us. This is kind of scary, right? It's understandable that it's kind of scary. You don't do this for a living. You haven't studied it for a living, probably. I've been thinking about nuclear bombs since I was in my 20s, maybe not all the time, but been dealing with these kind of issues. So to me, I hear that and go, well, that's just stupid, because our nuclear submarines are going to blow you out of the water, but they're going to blow you out of the land too if you were to attack Berlin. So you're not going to attack Berlin, and I know it, so I'm not worried about it. Whereas they're hoping that a lot of people don't know it and just go, oh my God, the Russians are threatening to attack. Isn't this scary? Maybe we should find peace at all costs. It's not dumb on the Russians' part, because the Russians aren't winning. They have no other way of winning than trying to scare the hell out of you. I saw something about this, but I just don't know enough about it. Rachel's asking about the Russians hitting a Turkish ship in the port of Kherson. Thank you, Boat Drinks, for the TikTok gifts there. Thank you. I read about this right before the show. It was a ship that was unmanned at the time. It's a Turkish flagged ship. The Russians hit it. I have no idea what's going on with it. Thank you, Harub. I have no idea what the deal is. Just no idea. Oops. Oh, bumper cars. Thank you, Hazel. I saw the bumper cars out of the side. I'm reading the questions over on YouTube really quick. Okay, Copies was weighing in again about why the Russians were having such a hard time destroying the anti-aircraft batteries that the Ukrainians have on the ground. In other words, why the Russians were not able to establish air superiority. They can't easily, because destruction of the anti-aircraft batteries is a special kind of skill for air superiority, part of Western doctrine and combined arms operations. Russians train, drop a bomb away. So in other words, the Russians train, here's a bomb, drop it, run. You need to have a much more combined, all of your forces working together to be able to take out the anti-aircraft batteries and things. And the Russians don't work that way. So they basically weren't able to take out the Ukrainian anti-aircraft. Interesting. It's a Turkish cargo ship. That's what I'd read. Yeah. But I don't know why the Russians would have blown it up. Well, okay. Let me just say this. Russia really doesn't want Ukraine having any shipments in or out, really, right? Initially, remember, they weren't letting anything go. And then finally, the UN and the Turks got involved, and they worked out the deal where some grain shipments can go out to, to Africa, to Europe, to Asia. But the Russians, I think, would like nothing better than to just, kill all commercial traffic in and out of Ukraine at all. It's possible that it was a ship that was bringing in illicit materials. Illicit. I mean, who knows, right? Supplies the Russians didn't know about. It is interesting, certainly, if nobody was on the boat, because the Turks won't like it if one of their boats got blown up, but it's less of an affront if nobody was on it. I don't know. It's certainly actually, there's a good point too. Ethan saying Turkish owned doesn't necessarily mean it's owned by Turkey. Correct. I had read that it was Turkish flagged, that it had a Turkish flag on it. A Turkish flag doesn't mean that it's a Turkish ship. It's almost it actually is. It's like incorporating in the US, for example. You incorporate in Delaware doesn't really mean you're a company working out of Delaware just because you incorporated in Delaware. So people could be flagged as a Turkish ship and not really be a Turkish ship, so that Turkey itself doesn't take offense. Thank you, Todd, for the stupa sticka. Appreciate that. And as I said, I'm going to go probably 10 minutes long tonight for the questions because the news part of the show went so long. So thank you, guys. Please do keep the gifts coming on TikTok and YouTube. I appreciate them. They help, and they do help me keep doing my work because I am doing this for free. You guys, you quite literally pay my bills, so thank you for that. What do we got here? That's interesting. I'm going to say Kine Faugstad. That'll be my guess. At the beginning of the war, countries never announced what weapons Ukraine got until it had arrived in Ukraine for security reasons. Why is it not like that now, or can it be like that now too? I don't recall if at the beginning everything was a secret until it got there. I'm not so sure about that. I would hope that we are announcing things for strategic reasons, meaning that we're doing it to kind of psych the Russians out and freak them out and everything else, right? That's my hope, that we wouldn't be announcing things simply because it looks, it makes us look good or whatever. That's not the reason you announce things. So I don't know. All I can say is, again, I hope, and I mean, our leaders aren't dumb. I hope that there is a military reason for why they announced the various weapons. Now, I will say this. Politically, there's a decent reason for announcing the weapons, right? Remember what the French did a couple of weeks ago. France comes out on a Tuesday or Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday, and maybe 2 weeks ago or so. France comes out and says, we are going to provide light tanks to Ukraine. The AMX 10RC tanks to Ukraine. And they did it in order to spur the Americans and the Germans. French diplomats admitted this to the press, to spur the Americans and the Germans to provide American and German infantry fighting vehicles, the Bradley fighting vehicles for the Americans and the Marder German vehicles. And the reason the French went public was to basically shame the Americans and the Germans to going public, right? Basically, they wanted the rest of the world to see it so that their own American citizens would go, hey, why aren't you doing it, right? And you see the same thing with the tanks. The British went public with the tanks, with providing. Okay, the French went public with the light tanks to help spur Germany to let the Leopard tanks go. The British went public with the Challenger 2 tanks that they're sending, which are main battle tanks. Again, because I think they wanted to embarrass the Germans, because Germany had said, hey, we don't want to be first. Someone else has got to do tanks first. So England came out, or the UK came out publicly and said, okay, we're going first. Here's our tanks. Where are you, Germany? Think about how all of us felt about Germany in the last couple of weeks, right? Publicly, we've been putting a lot of pressure on Germany. If all of this was behind the scenes, you would have had other NATO countries pissed at Germany behind the scenes, but publicly, we wouldn't have known that Germany was kind of dropping the ball. Or let me put it this way too. Even if you don't think Germany was dropping the ball, Germany would not have had a public relations crisis like it had the last week if all of this was private. And I suspect the public relations crisis helped to spur Germany to make the weapons available. And Germany going public against the Americans saying we want Abrams tanks may very well have spurred the Americans to do it too, right? Because even though we weren't talking about it, there's an element of, it's obnoxious, but if the Germans really want us to throw in 30 tanks, I mean, it's a waste of money, but if it can get it done, let's do it, right? So again, I'm hoping that the stuff happens publicly for a smart reason. Thank you, Todd. I'm hoping it's for a smart reason. So, who is that? Mark Troy. Thank you. Lots of super stickers. We don't always get super stickers. Thanks for that, guys. Thank you for the hat there. I'll look for another question or two on TikTok as well here. Interesting. CNN's reporting right now, private Russian army admits, the Wagner group admits Ukrainians showing fierce resistance. Well, what's going on in terms of the fighting today is the Ukrainians pretty much admitted that Soledar in the east has been lost, a small town, but it's right outside of Bakhmut, and that's the big town the Russians are trying, it's a bigger town the Russians are trying to get, and there's heavy fighting going on. It seems like the Russians are throwing more of their weight against that town. The funny thing is, though, that town doesn't matter to be Joe Biden ASMR. It doesn't matter. So it's kind of funny. TikTok question or comment. In my opinion, we agreed. Oh, hello, real quick, Hazel. Oh, that's cool, Hazel. That's very cool. I like that. Thank you. The Ferris wheel. We agreed on Abrams because Ukraine will have won the war before they even get trained on them. Something big coming soon. No, that's a possibility too. Right. That's a possibility. Right. That the Ukrainians, that the Americans said, you know what? No, I'm not convinced Ukraine's going to win the war in this year. Maybe, but it's possible that they said, actually, you know what's a good argument? Look, best case scenario, Ukraine's able to almost win this thing this year. Worst case scenario, it keeps dragging out. And if it keeps dragging out, we're going to need something more to give Ukraine to help pressure the Russians to realize this is foolhardy. That very well could be the Abrams tanks. So in essence, it's making the Abrams thing sort of another step. Thank you. Who's that? Ty? Oh, Ty Dreams too. Thank you, Ty Dreams too. Right. So that could be it. Yep. Elise. Hey, Elise with a super chat question. And thank you, Spirit, for the crown of flowers. Do you think Turkey will use the Koran burning incident to derail the Sweden-Finland NATO accession for good? Seems crazy to base a huge decision on the actions of a private citizen. So what's going on here is Turkey is freaking out, except Erdogan's doing it on purpose. All right, where to start with this? Thank you, Crusher, for the hat. So this idiot, thank you, Magic, this idiot far-right white supremacist, I think he's half Danish, half Swedish, decides he's going to do a protest outside the Turkish embassy in Stockholm, Sweden. And he decides he's going to burn the Koran, which is the Muslim prayer book, akin to our Bible. Okay. So he goes and he burns the prayer book, knowing what's going to happen. Right. I mean, we know how Muslim countries react when this stuff happens, doing it on purpose. Turkey freaks out. And Erdogan turns, and of course the Swedes had to allow it because Sweden's a democracy. You can't ban things like this. You just can't. It's not allowed. In America, you can't either. Sweden allows it. And Erdogan says, well, clearly a country that would allow this kind of thing doesn't deserve to, our support to join NATO. Only Turkey and Hungary remain in terms of countries that need to approve for Sweden and Finland to join NATO. There's now concern as to whether Turkey is ever going to let Sweden in. Keep in mind, Turkey already was playing games. They were claiming in the last 2 weeks, they were making all sorts of demands in the last 2 weeks that they had not made before. Sweden at this point has done everything Turkey had asked. So Turkey should be giving them their vote. Turkey decided a few weeks ago they wanted more people deported, or not deported, but extradited to Turkey, basically meaning send us your political, dissidents that who don't like Turkey, kind of thing. And the Swedish court said, no, we're a democracy. You can't just deport people because you don't like them. We can't send them to you based on that. And I think it may be a death penalty issue as well. So Erdogan gets pissed. So Erdogan was already pissed off. I think his initial piss off, even before this happened, was Erdogan saying, I want more American weapons. America needs to bribe me even more. So that was the first thing. Now I think Erdogan, the Biden administration turned around and said, okay, we will provide F-16s to Turkey, was it 35s or whatever, the newer fighter jets to Greece, because Greece and Turkey, you've got to provide them at the same time because they don't like each other. But the Turkish weapons will be contingent on Turkey approving of Sweden and Finland. I think Erdogan got pissed off because how dare you tell Lord God King Erdogan, right? That you put any contingency on it. So Erdogan decided to go after the Swedes to basically say, fine, then I'm not going to let them in at all. And America needs to turn around to him and say, fine, then you're not going to get any U.S. weapons again. We're going to give them all to Greece instead. And if you attack Greece, we're going to defend Greece. So how do you like them apples? But that's what's going on with all of the stuff. Now, Finland itself did say the other day that they might have to go it alone, which might be a smart idea anyway. If this keeps going on, let Turkey approve Finland and then we figure out the Swedish deal. But it's really obnoxious. It's really obnoxious, and I feel like this is what Turkey does, and this is what bad leaders do. It's what Trump does. Frankly, this is the way Trump negotiates deals. He waits until the end, and after you've done the deal, he just says, I'm not going to pay you, to try to get the price down. Turkey's trying to get a higher price now because they know they've got us. They've got NATO, and NATO needs to find a way to punish them, honestly, because otherwise they're just going to keep doing it next time. We need Turkey, but Turkey's in NATO because they need us too. And again, if they, I still say let Turkey join Russia. Really? Turkey wants to be in a military alliance with Russia, Syria, Belarus, Venezuela, Cuba. Who am I missing? North Korea? Who am I missing, right? Like, there's one or two other crazy countries that they'd be part of the alliance with. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. Or you could have NATO defending you. Okie dokie, right? Like okie dokie. Yeah, but China's not part of the alliance. China's playing both sides off each other, I think. China's not part of the alliance. I don't think, at least. I agree with you on supporting Greece, but what do you do? All right, let me look at one more here, and then we'll do a summary, and then we're done for the day, folks. A lot of these questions already went through. Well, who cares? I do think, Final thing is somebody said about tanks too. I do think eventually we're going to get to planes. We're going to eventually get to planes. We're going to eventually get to the point where we're going to start giving Ukraine planes that are didn't see that from Karen. Sorry about that, Karen. That we're going to see Well, no, we haven't been sending any planes. So first will be the Russian planes, the MiG-29s. That'll be the first barrier that we'll breach at some point. Then we'll start to see American planes, and then we see what goes. Will we send F-15, F-16s? Will we send Warthogs? Will we, what kind of planes would we be willing to send? French, German, British? I don't know. That's going to be the interesting one. And again, there's logistics and all of that involved in those as well. So, that could be, meaning training and everything else with those, that could take some time. F-16s especially, I'm sure the other fighter jets too. You don't just train on them for a month or two and know how to use them well. So there is that problem. Karen Jones, when the history books are written, will we find that this incredible alliance was engineered by Zelensky and his phones? I don't know. I may be biased here. I think this incredible alliance has been engineered by Joe Biden. I am somewhat critical of Biden on some of this stuff. I do think he's too afraid of Putin, and I think it shows. I think Biden has a little bit of a, hey, let's work out a deal side to him, so that even with Ukraine, he wants to work some deal out. And sometimes the deal is more important to him than the details of the deal. So that worries me a little. But I also think somebody has to hold the world together. Okay, obviously, Zelensky and the Ukrainians united the world. That's not my point. My point is, on the diplomacy front, making all of this work behind the scenes, I think that was the U.S. I do. I think we may find out that somebody else was involved too. Could have been the Baltic countries. Who knows who? I mean, it depends sort of what the political connections are in terms of who. But the U.S. The U.S. has the power to pull the strings behind the scenes because we've got the weapons and all of that we can entice, not the threats, but the enticements. We've got the promises we can make that really make a difference to win countries over. So I kind of wonder. Johnson was huge, but do you really think Boris Johnson had great sway with France and Germany? Right? Italy? You know what I mean? I feel like the person who kind of was holding it together was probably Biden. But Zelensky, I think to a degree, Zelensky, we already know. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know whether we're going to see revelations about Zelensky after the war, whether anything's going to surprise us in terms of how he dealt with the allies. I think it's more how Zelensky dealt with the threat at home and how he ran the war that's going to surprise us, like a lot of stuff we didn't know. I don't know if it's, oh my God, he had this. Maybe it will, though. Maybe it will, because we knew, for example, we now know that the Bulgarians provided tons of artillery to the weapons, the artillery shells to the Ukrainians in the first few months of the war. And we were told the Bulgarians weren't going to be doing anything, right? The Bulgarians were going to help repair weapons, but that was it. They didn't want to get involved by providing weapons, and secretly they were, and they were providing the lion's share of the artillery shells to Ukraine. And now we know. Now, is that something Zelensky pulled off with Bulgaria? Is that something Biden pulled off? Is that something somebody else pulled off? I don't know who's close to Bulgaria. Somebody else in Europe? Who knows? So I mean, and will we ever find out the details of some of that stuff? I mean, absolutely fascinating. Could that have been Boris Johnson? I don't know who's close to Bulgaria, but that's the stuff that'll be interesting to see. All right, let me do the quick roundup. I do the quick at the very end of the show. Thanks for hanging with us tonight, guys. We had a good crowd tonight, and I see people are still here, which is always nice to see. I do the quick roundup of the stories we talked about. I will mention briefly maybe any of them that I missed because we were trying to go through them quickly, so we had enough time to talk. And then I will call it quits. No Discord tonight because the last 2 nights we did do Discord. But as I said, the auction for the plane parts ends tomorrow. Little Russian fighter jet parts shot down over Ukraine. So that auction ends tomorrow, but there will be another one. I will put another one up for the public soon after that. So let's go. Today's Zelensky's 45th birthday. The U.S. approved 31 Abrams tanks for Ukraine. The Germans approved an initial allotment of 14 Leopard 2 tanks. 12 countries together in Europe may be providing around 80 to 100 Leopard tanks. The Brits have already been providing 414 of their tanks. The French are providing light tanks. The Swedes are saying that they may provide some of their main battle tanks. And now one of the big questions is timing, because even the initial tanks from the Germans are going to take a few months to get there, probably March. And the Ukrainians had to be well trained on them by then. And thank you, Hazel. There is a German offensive coming up soon, probably March, maybe April. And we want to make sure the Ukrainians have the tanks by then. Why modern tanks matter. We then talked about from a retired British air marshal who was talking about how important it is to have Western tanks, because the Western tanks basically beat the bejesus out of the Russian tanks. Ours are much more modern and cause way more damage to the Russian ones than they cause to us. Russia is threatening to deploy their new T-14 tank that it looks like it may not actually work, which is kind of funny. Putin may be doing an additional mobilization of 200,000 men, but he's going to do it quietly and secretly. Thank you, Gary Burke, for that. Quietly and secretly, so as not to piss off the Russian people. I'm not sure how you draft another 200,000 men into the military secretly and how people don't find out, but who knows? Slovakia wants to discuss transferring Soviet-made MiG-29 jet fighters to Ukraine. The U.S. reportedly asked the Israeli government to transfer its old Hawk anti-aircraft missiles in storage to Ukraine. Israel refused. The Bayraktar manufacturer donated 2 additional drones to the Ukrainian armed forces, and Ukraine confirms that it has withdrawn from Soledar near Bakhmut. So the little town has been lost next to the big town that doesn't matter anyway. I mean, it matters, sure. because it's Ukraine. We don't want to lose portions of Ukraine, but the town just doesn't matter. In terms of strategically, and it's ridiculous that the Ukrainians spent this much time, or the Ukrainians, that the Russians spent this much time attacking this town. Huge waste for the Russians. But you know what? If they want to waste their men and their weapons going after a town that strategically doesn't matter, works for me. Thank you, Jake, for that. All right, guys, I'm going to call it quits unless I didn't miss any super chat questions, I'm hoping. Okay, I've got the history books one here. I think we're good on that. All right. Thank you, Bonnie, for that. Let's call it quits, guys. I will see you tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Eastern time, US, as always. Same format. And there you go. Make sure you follow me on TikTok. Follow me on YouTube. I do updates throughout the day. TikTok, I do a few videos every day just on what's going on earlier in the day. And finally, do check out the links in my profile on TikTok. The Linktree links will take you to all of my links. And on YouTube, you can just go to aerovosis.com and it'll show you that too. All right, guys. Thank you, mods, for all of it. I see the trolls were especially bad on TikTok today. Hey, we're getting popular with the Russians. What can I tell you? But I do appreciate that. And I appreciate all the gifts as always, guys. You've been very generous and I appreciate it because it does help me keep doing the show and lets me know you care, which is also very nice as well. So thank you. All right. Good night, all. I will sign off. Go pay more attention to my dog, watch old Saint Elsewhere reruns, and think about Ukraine again tomorrow. So, all right, guys, have a good night.